The sound of flesh striking flesh echoed through the Camp Pendleton mess hall at 13:30 hours. Rachel Porter, the diminutive janitor in her stained blue coveralls, had just been struck across the face by Staff Sergeant Blake Harrison. Blood trickled from the corner of her mouth, but strangely, she didn't fall. She stood perfectly still, eyes fixed on the floor, both hands still gripping the mop handle. Blake turned to his buddies, laughing loudly. "See, I told you. These cleaning ladies need to learn what respect means." 20 Marines in the mess hall watched in silence. No one intervened. Rachel slowly set the mop down, wiping the blood from her lip with the back of her hand. She looked at the blood on her hand in an odd way, as if calculating something. "I'm sorry for getting your boots dirty," she said, her voice hoarse. Blake stepped closer. "Get on your knees and clean them." But Rachel didn't kneel. She straightened up, and for the first time, she looked directly into his eyes. Something in that gaze made Blake unconsciously take a step back. The mess hall sank into tense silence, and in the next 20 minutes, everything would change completely. The afternoon sun blazed through the windows of the sprawling mess facility, casting harsh shadows across the polished floor that Rachel had been cleaning for the past 3 hours. At 5'3" and maybe 110 pounds soaking wet, she cut an unremarkable figure among the towering Marines who frequented the base. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face free of makeup, her hands calloused from months of manual labor. To anyone watching, she was invisible, just another civilian contractor doing the jobs nobody else wanted. Blake Harrison stood 6'2", 220 pounds of muscle and arrogance wrapped in desert camis. His squad gathered around him like wolves circling prey, their laughter sharp and predatory. Mason, his second in command, tossed a dirty rag at Rachel. It sailed through the air in a lazy arc, aimed at her head. Without looking up, Rachel's hand shot out and caught it mid-flight, her movement so economical it seemed almost accidental. "Nice catch for a mop jockey," Mason sneered, but there was something in his voice, a tiny note of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. The other Marines didn't notice, too busy enjoying the show. Rachel folded the rag with precise movements, each fold crisp and perfect, the kind of technique drilled into recruits during basic training until it became muscle memory. Connor, a fresh-faced private barely out of boot camp, shifted uncomfortably near the door. "Hey, maybe we should—" Blake's hand shot out, shoving the kid back against the wall. "Maybe you should shut your mouth, Boot. This is how we maintain standards around here." The younger Marine's face flushed red, but he stayed silent, his eyes darting between Rachel and the exit. Rachel returned to mopping, her posture different now, weight balanced on the balls of her feet, knees slightly bent, the mop handle held at an angle that would allow for quick movement in any direction. It was subtle, the kind of thing most people wouldn't notice. But Logan, the communications tech sitting at a corner table with his laptop, noticed. His fingers paused over the keyboard as he watched her move, something nagging at the back of his mind. Blake kicked the bucket of dirty water, sending it cascading across the floor. The gray water spread in a wide pool, soaking into Rachel's worn sneakers. She stood motionless for a long moment, then bent to right the bucket. As she moved, her sleeve rode up, revealing a portion of her forearm. The skin there was marked with scars, not the random patterns of accidents or self-harm, but the distinctive starburst pattern of shrapnel wounds, IED scars, combat scars. Ethan, the mess hall's civilian manager, emerged from the kitchen, took one look at the scene, and immediately retreated. He'd been around long enough to know when not to get involved. Through the serving window, kitchen staff peered out nervously, their usual chatter reduced to whispers. "You going to clean that up, or do I need to show you how it's done?" Blake's voice carried the lazy confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences. He'd been stationed at Pendleton for 2 years, using his rank and connections to build a little kingdom of intimidation. The base commander's policy of non-interference with minor disciplinary matters had given him free rein. Rachel's response was to continue working, her movements steady and methodical. She navigated the spilled water with practiced ease, never slipping, never losing her balance. Her breathing remained even, controlled, the kind of breathing pattern maintained during high-stress operations to keep heart rate steady and hands stable. Captain Anderson walked through the main entrance, his eyes taking in the scene with a quick sweep. He paused for a heartbeat, his gaze lingering on Rachel, then deliberately turned and walked toward the coffee station. The message was clear. Whatever was happening here was beneath his notice. A few of the younger Marines exchanged glances, reading the implicit permission in their superior's indifference. "I asked you a question," Blake said, stepping into Rachel's personal space. She had to tilt her head back to look at him, the size difference almost comical. "I don't want any trouble," she said quietly, her voice carrying an odd flatness. Not submission, but the careful neutrality of someone conserving energy for what might come next. "Trouble?" Mason laughed, moving to flank her from the left. "Lady, you caused trouble the moment you took a job you clearly can't handle. This is a warrior's place. You're just playing dress-up with that mop. If you're feeling that rage building up right now, that's exactly what this story is designed to do. This isn't just another military tale. It's about the invisible warriors who walk among us. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because what's coming next will make you question everything you thought you knew about power and respect. Trust me, you don't want to miss the moment when everyone in that mess hall realizes who they've been stepping on." The mess hall had filled up during the confrontation. Tables that had been empty were now occupied by curious Marines, their meals forgotten as they watched the drama unfold. Some pulled out phones, ready to record whatever happened next. Near the back, a table of veteran NCOs observed with practiced eyes, their expressions unreadable. Rachel bent to wring out her mop, the motion exposing the back of her neck. There, barely visible beneath her collar, was the edge of a tattoo, black ink forming what looked like numbers and letters, too obscured to read clearly. Logan's eyes narrowed. He'd seen tattoos like that before, in classified briefings about special operations units whose very existence was need to know. "You know what your problem is?" Blake continued, warming to his audience. "You're one of those washed-up veterans who thinks mopping floors on a military base makes you special. Let me guess, did 4 years as a supply clerk, got out, couldn't hack it in the real world, and now you're back here pretending you still matter?" The room tensed at his words. Even among his supporters, there were those who shifted uncomfortably at mocking a veteran, any veteran. But Blake was too caught up in his performance to notice the subtle change in atmosphere. Rachel's hand stilled on the mop handle. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried clearly in the sudden quiet. "I'm just here to do my job." There was something in the way she said it, not pleading, not defensive, just a statement of fact that somehow made Blake's next words sound hollow, even before he spoke them. "Your job?" Blake's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. Or trying to. Rachel's arm moved in a subtle circle, a textbook sear escape technique that redirected his force without seeming to resist. His hand closed on empty air, and he stumbled slightly, caught off balance. A few people in the room caught it, the precision of the movement, the economy of motion that spoke of countless hours of practice. "Don't touch me," Rachel said, still in that same quiet voice. But now there was steel beneath the softness, a warning that made Mason take an unconscious step back before catching himself. Blake's face flushed red, embarrassment mixing with anger. He'd been made to look foolish in front of his men, and that was unforgivable. Modern military medical scanning technology can now detect micro-expressions and stress patterns invisible to the naked eye. These portable diagnostic devices, originally designed for combat zones, can read vital signs from 30 feet away, analyzing everything from heart rate variability to cortisol levels through skin temperature changes. Special operations units use these to identify threats before they materialize, reading the biological signatures of deception and aggression. If someone had been using one of those devices on Rachel at that moment, they would have seen something remarkable. Her vitals remained steady, showing none of the stress markers typical of a confrontation. Her body was ready, but her mind was calm, processing threats and calculating responses with the detachment of someone who'd faced far worse than an angry sergeant. "Listen carefully," Blake said, his voice dropping to a growl. "You're going to apologize. You're going to get on your knees, clean my boots, and then you're going to quit this job and never come back. Because if I see you here tomorrow, you'll what?" The question came from Henry, a grizzled veteran sitting alone at a corner table. He was in civilian clothes, but everything about him screamed former military. The haircut, the posture, the 1,000-yard stare that came from too many deployments. "You'll what, Sergeant? Assault a civilian contractor in front of 30 witnesses." Blake rounded on him. "This doesn't concern you, old man." Henry stood slowly, his movements deliberate. Everything that happens on this base concerns me. I did 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq. I've seen real warriors, son. And real warriors don't need to prove themselves by pushing around janitors. The room divided along invisible lines. Blake's crew on one side, a growing number of skeptics on the other, and a large group in the middle, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. Rachel remained motionless in the center of it all, her eyes tracking everyone's position without seeming to move her head. She noted exits, potential weapons, obstacles, old habits. Logan's fingers flew across his keyboard. He'd pulled up the base's personnel database, running a search on facial recognition. The system was slow, cycling through thousands of records, but something about Rachel's profile was triggering flags in the system. Redacted sections, classified markers, access denied warnings. Blake stepped closer to Rachel again, close enough that she could smell the tobacco on his breath. "You think you're tough? Think some washed-up vet is going to save you?" His hand moved toward her again, reaching for her collar. What happened next took less than 2 seconds. Blake's hand never made contact. Rachel's body flowed like water, her center of gravity shifting as she pivoted on one foot. Her hand came up, not in a fist, but open, palm striking Blake's wrist at precisely the right angle to redirect his momentum. He stumbled past her, his own force carrying him into the table behind her. The mess hall erupted in surprised murmurs. It hadn't looked like much. No dramatic martial arts moves, no obvious aggression. To most observers, it seemed like Blake had simply lost his balance. But to those who knew what to look for, it was a textbook defensive maneuver, executed with the kind of precision that took years to master. Blake's face went from red to purple. He spun around, his hand dropping to the knife on his belt, not drawing it, but making the threat clear. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." Rachel's eyes flicked to the knife, then back to Blake's face. Her expression didn't change, but something shifted in her stance, a subtle adjustment that put her weight on her back foot, ready to move in any direction. "I don't want to hurt anyone," she said, and there was something in the way she phrased it that made several people in the room take notice. Not, "I don't want to get hurt," not, "Please don't hurt me," but, "I don't want to hurt anyone." Mason and 2 other Marines from Blake's squad moved to surround her. The situation was escalating beyond mere harassment now. This was about to become assault, possibly worse. And still, no one in authority moved to intervene. Captain Anderson remained by the coffee station, deliberately looking at his phone. Still watching? Good. That means you can feel something's not right here. Share this video with someone who understands that real strength never needs to announce itself. The reveal is coming, and when it hits, you'll understand why some people are untouchable. Lieutenant Colonel Samuel Wright had been walking past the mess hall when he heard the commotion. He paused at the entrance, his sharp eyes taking in the scene in an instant. The surrounded woman, the aggressive postures of the Marines, the tension that filled the room like smoke. He'd been in enough combat zones to recognize when violence was about to erupt, but something else caught his attention. The way the woman stood, the positioning of her feet, the loose readiness of her hands. It was familiar. More than familiar. It was identical to the stance he'd seen in training videos of Tier 1 operators, the kind of videos that required special clearance just to watch. Rachel hadn't moved as the 4 Marines surrounded her. She stood in the center of their circle, her breathing still even, her eyes unfocused in a way that meant she was tracking all of them simultaneously through peripheral vision. Her hand brushed against her thigh, where someone trained in close protection would typically carry a concealed weapon. 4 against 1, Connor said from his position by the door, his young voice cracking slightly. "This isn't right." "Shut it, Boot," Blake snarled without looking at him. His attention was entirely on Rachel now, his pride demanding satisfaction for the embarrassment she'd caused him. This woman needs to learn about respect, about hierarchy, about knowing her place. Rachel's head tilted slightly, as if she found something amusing. "Hierarchy," she repeated softly. "I understand hierarchy better than you might think." Mason laughed. "Oh yeah? What? You were some corporal in the chair force? Maybe a weekend warrior in the National Guard?" Rachel didn't respond to the taunt. Instead, she shifted her mop, holding it in a way that transformed it from a cleaning tool into a potential weapon. The movement was subtle, but Wright caught it. His eyes widened slightly. He'd seen that exact grip before, in a classified demonstration of improvised weapons techniques. "Last chance," Blake said, pulling his knife free from its sheath. The blade caught the fluorescent lights, 6 inches of sharp steel. "Apologize, or things get unpleasant." The room held its breath. Several Marines stood up from their tables, uncertain whether to intervene or just get a better view. The kitchen staff had disappeared entirely, not wanting to be witnesses to whatever was about to happen. Rachel's voice, when she spoke, was different, harder. The carefully maintained civilian facade cracking just slightly. "Put the knife away, Sergeant. You're making a mistake." "The only mistake," Blake began, stepping forward with the knife raised. He never finished the sentence. Rachel moved, and it was like watching a magic trick. One moment she was standing still, the next Blake was on the ground, his knife hand twisted behind his back, the blade clattering harmlessly across the floor. She'd used his own momentum against him, a perfect application of force that spoke of muscle memory drilled in through thousands of repetitions. Mason rushed forward, only to find himself airborne as Rachel swept his legs and guided him into a table with her mop handle. The third Marine threw a punch that never landed. Rachel wasn't where he expected her to be, having shifted just enough that his fist whistled past her ear. Her palm struck his solar plexus. Not hard enough to cause serious damage, but sufficient to drop him to his knees, gasping for air. The fourth Marine, smarter than his friends, backed away with his hands raised. The entire exchange had taken less than 4 seconds. Rachel stood in the center of the mess hall, her mop still in hand, not even breathing hard. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Logan's laptop chimed, the sound startling in the quiet. He looked at his screen, his face going pale. "Oh my God," he whispered, loud enough for those nearby to hear. She can't be." Wright stepped fully into the room, his command presence immediately drawing attention. "Stand down, all of you," he ordered, his voice carrying the authority of 20 years of service. "Sergeant Harrison, on your feet." Blake struggled up, his face a mixture of pain, humiliation, and rage. "Sir, this woman attacked—" "I saw what happened, Sergeant." Wright's voice cut through the excuse like a blade. "And I strongly suggest you shut your mouth before you make your situation worse." He walked toward Rachel, his eyes studying her with new interest. Up close, he could see more details. The way she held herself, the hypervigilance in her eyes, the small scars on her hands that came from years of weapons handling. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "might I ask your name?" "Rachel Porter," she replied, her voice back to its neutral tone. "I'm just a janitor, Colonel." Wright's eyes flicked to her neck, where the collar of her coveralls had shifted during the altercation. The tattoo was more visible now, a unit designation partially obscured, but familiar enough to make his breath catch. "Just a janitor," he repeated slowly. "Of course you are." Blake, still nursing his twisted arm, wasn't ready to let it go. "Sir, she's obviously some kind of trained—" "Sergeant," Wright interrupted, "I'm giving you one chance to walk away from this. Take it." But Blake's pride wouldn't let him. Mason was getting back to his feet, and the other 2 Marines were recovering as well. The odds were still 4-1, and Blake had his reputation to think about. "She's hiding something," he said loudly, playing to the crowd. "Probably went AWOL, or got dishonorably discharged. That's why she's mopping floors." Logan stood up from his table, his laptop in hand. "You might want to stop talking," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "You really might want to stop." "What's your problem, tech boy?" Mason snarled. Logan turned his laptop around. On the screen was a personnel file, mostly redacted with black bars. But what was visible was enough. A photograph of a younger Rachel in dress uniform, medals covering her chest, including a Navy Cross and a Purple Heart. Below that, in red letters, classified, special access required. "Ghost Unit," someone whispered from the back of the room. The 2 words rippled through the crowd like an electric current. Ghost Unit 7, the semi-mythical special operations group that supposedly didn't exist, whose operations were so classified that even their existence was officially denied. Blake laughed, but it sounded forced. "That's ridiculous. Ghost Unit is just military urban legend, stories to scare boot camp recruits." Elite operators retiring from classified units often struggle with financial documentation. Specialized insurance and investment firms now cater exclusively to these shadow warriors, providing coverage without requiring full disclosure of service history. These confidential wealth management services understand that some heroes can't list their real accomplishments on a resume, offering unique portfolio strategies for those whose greatest achievements remain classified. Rachel had used one of these services when she'd transitioned to civilian life, setting up her cover identity as a janitor while she conducted her real mission at Pendleton. "Is it?" Wright asked quietly. He'd moved closer to Rachel, close enough to see the full tattoo now that her collar had been pulled aside. GT 7749, Scorpion. The mess hall went absolutely still. Even the skeptics knew that designation. Ghost Team 7, Operator 749, call sign Scorpion. There were stories about Scorpion, whispered in the dark corners of military bases around the world. Stories about impossible missions, about an operative who'd survived situations that should have killed anyone else. Rachel remained silent, neither confirming nor denying. But her stance had changed subtly. She was no longer hiding, no longer playing the helpless janitor. She stood like what she was, a warrior. "This is insane," Blake said, but his voice had lost its conviction. "She's just some washout playing pretend." He made the mistake of reaching for her again, trying to grab her collar, to prove his point by exposing whatever fake tattoo she had. His hand never made it. Rachel moved with lightning precision, catching his wrist and applying pressure to a nerve cluster that sent him to his knees, gasping in pain. "I said," she stated calmly, "don't touch me." Mason started forward but froze when Rachel's eyes locked on his. There was something in that gaze, not a threat exactly, but a promise. A promise that if he took another step, he would regret it for the rest of his life. "Stand down, Marine," Wright ordered sharply. "All of you, stand down now." The colonel pulled out his phone, dialing a number from memory. The conversation was brief, conducted in low tones, but everyone could hear the "yes, sir" and "understood, sir" responses. When he hung up, his face was grave. "Clear the mess hall," he ordered. Everyone out except for Sergeant Harrison, his squad, and Ms. Porter. The room erupted in protests and questions, but Wright's glare silenced them. Marines filed out reluctantly, many pulling out phones to text or call friends about what they had witnessed. Within minutes, the story would be all over the base. Logan was one of the last to leave, but not before he caught Rachel's eye. "Kandahar, 2019?" he asked quietly. She gave him the slightest nod, and his face went white. He knew what had happened in Kandahar in 2019. Everyone with clearance knew. Operation Medusa, the mission that had officially never happened, where a single operative had held off 200 enemy fighters for 72 hours, protecting a forward operating base until reinforcements arrived. When the mess hall was clear, except for the principal players, Wright turned to Blake. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Blake, still on his knees, tried to salvage some dignity. "Sir, she's just a janitor. This has to be some kind of mistake." "The mistake," a new voice said from the doorway, "was yours, Sergeant." General Miller walked in, his presence immediately commanding attention. Two-star general, combat veteran, and more importantly, someone with clearance to know about Ghost Unit 7. He walked directly to Rachel, and to the shock of everyone present, saluted her. "Captain Porter," he said formally, "I apologize for the treatment you've received. I was informed you were on base, but not of your current cover identity." Rachel returned the salute with crisp precision. "General, my cover was necessary for the mission." "What mission?" Blake asked, his voice barely a whisper now. Miller turned to him with contempt. "The mission to root out a corruption ring operating on this base. A ring that, according to Captain Porter's reports, you're a peripheral part of, Sergeant. Not a major player, but you've been taking bribes to overlook certain supply shipments." Blake's face went from red to white. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Save it," Miller said curtly. "We have everything. 6 months of surveillance, documented evidence, recorded conversations. Captain Porter has been gathering intelligence while you and your friends played your little power games." Wright looked at Rachel with new respect. 6 months as a janitor, that's deep cover dedication." Rachel shrugged slightly. "I've done worse. At least this assignment didn't involve getting shot at every day." "Just most days, from what I've heard," Miller said dryly. "The Black Sea operation, for instance." There was something in the way he said it that made it clear. The Black Sea operation was another one of those missions that had never officially happened, but had saved countless lives. Rachel's expression didn't change, but Mason, still standing frozen in place, made a small sound of recognition. He'd heard rumors about the Black Sea, about a single operative who'd infiltrated a terrorist cell and destroyed it from within. "You're really her," he said, his voice filled with awe and terror. "You're the Scorpion. You're the one who—" "That's classified," Rachel cut him off, but without heat. She was tired. They could all see it now. Tired of the cover, tired of pretending to be weak, tired of taking abuse from people who had no idea what real combat looked like. Blake tried one last desperate gambit. "Even if she is who you say she is, she still assaulted us. There are witnesses. Right now, your instincts are screaming that Rachel is more than she seems. Comment below what you think her real identity is. And keep watching, because in 60 seconds, you're about to witness one of the most satisfying reversals ever captured." Miller laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. "Assault?" I reviewed the security footage on my way here. I saw a civilian contractor defending herself against 4 armed Marines who threatened her with a deadly weapon. If anyone's getting charged with assault, it's you. He nodded to Wright, who pulled out his phone and made another call. Within moments, military police began filing into the mess hall. "Sergeant Harrison, Corporal Mason, you're under arrest for assault, conduct unbecoming, and suspected involvement in criminal corruption. You have the right to remain silent." As the MPs cuffed Blake and Mason, Rachel finally allowed herself to relax slightly. She'd maintained her cover for 6 months, enduring daily humiliation and harassment to get close to the corruption ring. Blake had been a small fish, but his connections had led her to bigger targets, officers who were selling military supplies on the black market, contractors overcharging the government, a whole network of greed and betrayal. "Your final report?" Miller asked her quietly. "Ready for submission," Rachel replied. "I have enough evidence to bring down the entire ring. 23 individuals, including 2 lieutenant colonels and a defense contractor with ties to foreign nationals." Wright whistled low. 23. "And you got all this while mopping floors?" "People talk around janitors," Rachel said simply. "They think we're invisible, beneath notice. It's actually the perfect cover for intelligence gathering." Blake, being led away in cuffs, turned back one last time. "This isn't over. I have friends, connections. You can't just—" "Sergeant Harrison," Rachel said, her voice cutting through his threats like ice. "I've been tortured by professionals in 3 different countries. I've survived assassination attempts by trained killers. I've walked through fire and death in places you couldn't even imagine. Do you really think your friends concern me?" For the first time, Blake truly looked at her. Not at the janitor, not at the small woman he'd tried to humiliate, but at the warrior beneath. What he saw there made him stumble, the MPs having to catch him before he fell. Because in Rachel's eyes, he saw the truth of what she was. Someone who had faced the worst humanity had to offer, and survived. Someone who had been forged in the crucible of real combat into something beyond his comprehension. As the MPs dragged him away, the mess hall fell silent again. Miller turned to the remaining Marines who had been part of Blake's squad. "You have a choice. Cooperate fully with the investigation, testify truthfully about what you've seen and heard over the past months, or join your sergeant in a military prison. Decide quickly." They all chose cooperation, scrambling over each other to provide information, to distance themselves from Blake's crimes. Rachel watched impassively. She'd seen it before, the collapse of loyalty when consequences became real, the desperate self-preservation that kicked in when the game stopped being fun. Advanced tactical training programs now offer civilian certification courses, teaching de-escalation techniques used by special forces. These online academies provide legitimate credentials in security consulting, allowing veterans to transition their skills legally. The curriculum covers everything from threat assessment to protective services, creating new career paths for those who've served in units that officially don't exist. Rachel had actually helped design some of these programs, ensuring that operators like her could find meaningful work after leaving the shadows. "So what now?" Wright asked Miller. "Does Captain Porter continue her cover?" Miller looked at Rachel. "That's up to her. The investigation is essentially complete. She could return to active status with Ghost Unit or—" He paused, studying her face. Or she could take the retirement she's earned 10 times over. Rachel was quiet for a long moment, considering. 6 months of being invisible, of being disrespected and overlooked, of watching the worst of military culture play out in front of her. But also 6 months of relative peace, of not being shot at, of not having to make life or death decisions every day. There's something else, she said finally. The corruption ring has international connections. Someone's been feeding intelligence to foreign operatives, using the supply chain as a cover for espionage. Miller's expression hardened. How deep does it go? Deep enough that I need more time. Another month, maybe 2. But not as a janitor. She looked at the mess hall, at the mop and bucket she'd used for half a year. My cover's blown now. Everyone on base will know who I am within the hour. Then we create a new cover, Wright suggested. Bring you in as a consultant, someone conducting efficiency reviews. It would give you access to everything you need. Rachel nodded slowly. That could work, but first, I need to deal with something. She walked over to where her mop had fallen during the altercation, picking it up and carefully placing it back in the bucket. It was a small gesture, but somehow significant. A warrior choosing to complete her mundane task with the same precision she brought to combat operations. Captain Porter, Miller said formally, on behalf of the United States Marine Corps, I apologize for what you've endured during your time here. Your service, both visible and invisible, honors us all. Rachel straightened, accepting the apology with a slight nod. Service doesn't seek recognition, General. It never has. No, Miller agreed, but it deserves it nonetheless. The door to the mess hall opened, and Connor, the young private who had tried to intervene earlier, peered in nervously. Sir, is it safe to come back in? Wright gestured him forward. It's safe, Private. Come in. Connor entered, followed by several other Marines who had been waiting outside. They all stared at Rachel with a mixture of awe and embarrassment. These were the ones who had stood by, who had watched her be harassed and done nothing. Now they knew they had been in the presence of a legend and had failed to recognize it. Henry, the veteran who had spoken up, approached Rachel with a slight limp. Ma'am, he said quietly, I had a feeling about you. The way you moved, the way you watched everything. I've seen that before, in operators who were trying to blend in. Why didn't you say anything? Rachel asked, genuinely curious. Henry shrugged. Wasn't my secret to tell. Besides, I figured you had your reasons. Ghost Unit doesn't do anything without a purpose. Logan had also returned, his laptop clutched to his chest. Captain, I'm sorry, I ran your face through the recognition system. I didn't mean to compromise. You didn't compromise anything, Rachel assured him. If I hadn't wanted to be found eventually, I would have altered my appearance more substantially. The investigation was nearly complete anyway. Still, Logan persisted. When I saw the classification levels, the redacted operations, Kandahar, the Black Sea, Operation Twilight in Syria, all classified, Rachel reminded him gently but firmly. I know, Logan struggled for words. My brother was at FOB Chapman during Kandahar. He was one of the ones you saved. He never knew who held the line for those 3 days, but I knew. When I saw your file, I knew. The room had filled with more people now, word spreading quickly through the base. Everyone wanted to see the legendary Scorpion, the Ghost Unit operative who had been hiding in plain sight. Rachel bore their stares with practiced calm, but Miller could see the tension in her shoulders. That's enough, the general announced. Everyone out. This is still an active investigation scene. As people filed out reluctantly, many tried to catch Rachel's eye, to offer a nod or a word of respect. She acknowledged them politely, but distantly, already rebuilding the walls that kept her separate from the regular world. When the room was clear again, Miller turned back to Rachel. There's something else. Something that wasn't in your reports. Rachel raised an eyebrow, waiting. Damascus, Miller said simply. We have a situation developing there. Intelligence suggests a major attack being planned, possibly involving chemical weapons. We need someone who can infiltrate, gather intelligence, and, if necessary, neutralize the threat. When? Rachel asked, no hesitation in her voice. 2 weeks, maybe less. She considered this. I'll need to finish here first. The corruption ring can be handled by conventional investigators now that you've done the heavy lifting, Miller interrupted. Damascus is priority 1. Rachel nodded slowly. I'll need my team, Reaper, Phoenix, and Titan at minimum. They're already being recalled, Miller admitted. We anticipated your answer. For the first time since the confrontation began, Rachel smiled, a small, dangerous expression that transformed her face. You know me too well, General. I know that you can't walk away from a fight that matters, Miller replied. It's both your greatest strength and your most dangerous weakness. Wright, who had been silent for several minutes, finally spoke up. With all due respect, Captain Porter, you've been undercover for 6 months, dealing with daily harassment and disrespect. Don't you need time to decompress? Rachel looked at him with those dark, unreadable eyes. Colonel, for 6 months I've been mopping floors and taking verbal abuse. Before that, I spent 8 months in a Chechen prison, being tortured for information I didn't give. Before that, 14 months deep cover in a terrorist cell where one wrong word meant death. This assignment has been a vacation. The casual way she said it, the matter-of-fact tone, made both officers step back slightly. It was a reminder that Rachel Porter, the quiet janitor, existed in a world they could barely imagine, where violence and death were constant companions and peace was the aberration, not the norm. The Damascus mission, Rachel continued, will it be sanctioned or black? Black, Miller admitted. If you're caught, we never heard of you. So, business as usual, Rachel said dryly. I'll need 3 days to close out the investigation here, write my final reports, and brief my replacement. Then I'll be ready. Miller nodded. 3 days. Not one more. As he turned to leave, he paused at the door. Oh, and Captain, your actual rank is Lieutenant Colonel now. The promotion came through while you were undercover. Congratulations. Rachel absorbed this information without visible reaction. Thank you, sir. After Miller left, only Wright remained with her in the empty mess hall. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting long shadows across the floor she had mopped countless times over the past months. Was it worth it? Wright asked quietly. 6 months of this, just to catch some corrupt suppliers? Rachel picked up the bucket, carrying it toward the janitor's closet with the same care she'd shown throughout her cover. 23 people were stealing from the military, Colonel, selling secrets, equipment, putting our soldiers at risk for money. Yes, it was worth it. She stored the mop and bucket in their proper places, then turned back to Wright. Every mission is worth it if it protects those who serve, even if they never know they were protected. Wright watched her remove the janitor's coveralls, revealing the athletic build beneath, the numerous scars that mapped a career spent in harm's way. You could have revealed yourself at any time, ended the harassment, and compromised the mission, Rachel replied simply. Personal comfort doesn't factor into it. As she walked toward the door, Wright called after her. What would you have done if Blake hadn't pushed it? If he'd just kept to verbal harassment? Rachel paused, considering. I would have endured it for as long as necessary, but he pulled a knife. That changed the calculus. If this story gave you chills, check out our next video about the female pilot who made an entire squadron kneel. Click the thumbnail on screen now, because that story makes this one look tame. Wright nodded, understanding. There were lines that couldn't be crossed, even in deep cover. The threat of deadly force was one of them. As Rachel left the mess hall, she found a crowd waiting outside. Word had spread across the entire base in the hour since the confrontation. Marines, sailors, civilian contractors, they all wanted to see the ghost unit operative who had been hidden among them. She moved through the crowd with purposeful strides, neither hurrying nor lingering. Some called out to her, apologies mostly. From those who had witnessed the harassment over the months and done nothing. She acknowledged them with slight nods, but didn't stop to absolve anyone of their guilt. That wasn't her job. Connor was waiting by her quarters, the small room assigned to janitorial staff that had been her home for 6 months. Ma'am, he said nervously, I wanted to apologize for not doing more, for letting it happen. Rachel studied him for a moment. He was young, probably no more than 19, still learning what kind of Marine he wanted to be. You tried to speak up, she said finally. That's more than most did. But I didn't actually do anything, Connor protested. Private, you're fresh out of boot camp, facing a staff sergeant with connections. Speaking up at all took courage. Don't dismiss that. Connor straightened slightly at her words. Can I ask you something, ma'am? How do you do it? Stay hidden for so long, take all that abuse, and never break cover? Rachel considered the question. It was one she'd been asked before, by psychologists and debriefers trying to understand how ghost unit operators maintain their covers under extreme pressure. "You remember that the mission matters more than your comfort," she said finally. "More than your pride, more than your anger. Every insult I took, every floor I mopped, brought me closer to exposing the corruption. That made it bearable. But didn't you want to fight back, to show them who you really were?" "Every day," Rachel admitted. "But wanting and doing are different things. Discipline means choosing the mission over satisfaction." Connor absorbed this wisdom, filing it away. Rachel could see him processing it, trying to apply it to his own experience. She hoped he would remember it when faced with his own tests of discipline. Her phone buzzed, a secure satellite phone that had been hidden in her quarters throughout the assignment. The message was brief. "Package arriving in 2 hours. Prepare for extraction." Her team was coming. Reaper, Phoenix, and Titan. The other members of Ghost Unit 7 who had become more than teammates over their years of operations. They were family, bonded by shared trauma and survival against impossible odds. Rachel entered her quarters and began packing. There wasn't much, a few changes of clothes, some personal items, the surveillance equipment she'd hidden throughout the room. Everything fit into a single duffel bag, the same one she'd arrived with 6 months ago. As she packed, she found the notebook where she'd recorded her observations. Not the official intelligence about the corruption ring that was stored electronically on encrypted drives. This was personal observations about the culture of the base, the casual cruelty that Blake represented, the way power could corrupt, even in small ways. There was a knock on her door. She opened it to find General Miller standing there with a sealed envelope. "Your orders," he said simply. "Effective immediately, you're recalled to active Ghost Unit status." Rachel took the envelope without opening it. She knew what it contained: authorization codes, contact protocols, the framework for a mission that didn't officially exist. "There's one more thing," Miller said. "Blake's phone records show calls to numbers we can't trace. Encrypted communications that suggest the corruption ring has connections we haven't uncovered yet." "Foreign intelligence services?" Rachel asked. "Possibly, or private military contractors. Either way, it's a thread that needs pulling." Rachel nodded. "I'll look into it from Damascus. Sometimes investigations converge in unexpected ways." Miller studied her face. "You think the two are connected? Damascus and the corruption here?" "I think very little happens in isolation," Rachel replied carefully. "Money, weapons, intelligence, they all flow through the same channels eventually." After Miller left, Rachel sat on the narrow bed that had been hers for 6 months. She thought about all the mornings she'd woken up here, put on the janitor's coveralls, and gone to clean up after people who saw her as less than human. It had been a unique form of torture, in some ways worse than physical pain, because it attacked the spirit rather than the body. But she'd endured it, as she'd endured everything else her career had thrown at her, because that's what Ghost Unit operators did. They endured, they survived, and they completed the mission. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a video message from Reaper, her closest friend in the unit. The woman's scarred face filled the screen, grinning with anticipation. "Heard you've been playing janitor, Scorpion. Can't wait to hear that story. Phoenix says to tell you he's bringing your gear. The real gear, not the mop and bucket variety." Rachel smiled despite herself. In a few hours, she'd leave this base and this identity behind. The janitor would disappear, and the operator would return. But the lessons learned here would stay with her, about power and its abuse, about the courage required to stand up for others, about the strength found in endurance. She stood and took one last look around the small room. Tomorrow, someone else would live here, another invisible person doing invisible work. She hoped they would be treated better than she had been, that Blake's arrest would serve as a warning to others who might abuse their power. But she knew better. There would always be people like Blake, those who confused rank with righteousness, who saw kindness as weakness. And there would always need to be people like her, willing to stand in the shadows and protect those who couldn't protect themselves. A vehicle pulled up outside, unmarked, windows tinted, engine running. Rachel grabbed her bag and walked out without looking back. The driver was someone she didn't recognize, but the passenger was Phoenix, his weathered face breaking into a grin when he saw her. "You look like hell, Scorpion," he said cheerfully. 6 months of mopping floors will do that," Rachel replied, settling into the back seat. "Could be worse," Titan's voice came from the front seat. The massive operator turned to look at her. "Remember Belgrade? That sewer tunnel?" "Don't remind me," Rachel groaned. "At least here I had running water and a bed." As they drove away from Camp Pendleton, Rachel watched the base recede in the distance. Somewhere back there, Blake was sitting in a cell, contemplating his future court-martial. Mason and the others were being interrogated, their comfortable world of privilege and power crumbling around them. And somewhere, Connor and the other young Marines were perhaps thinking about what they'd witnessed, about the difference between real strength and the illusion of it, about the courage required to endure disrespect in service of a greater purpose. "So," Reaper said from the driver's seat. "Damascus?" "Damascus," Rachel confirmed. "The chemical weapons intel is solid?" "Solid enough that they're pulling us off leave," Rachel replied. "When has that ever been wrong?" The team fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts about what awaited them. Damascus would be dangerous. It always was. But after 6 months of enforced passivity, of taking abuse without responding, Rachel found herself almost looking forward to it. At least in Damascus, the enemies would be clear, the mission straightforward. No more pretending to be weak, no more absorbing insults with a bowed head. Her phone rang, the civilian phone, not the encrypted one. She recognized the number as Camp Pendleton's main line. "Porter," she answered. "Ma'am, this is Lieutenant Colonel Wright. I wanted to let you know that we've made 12 more arrests based on the evidence you gathered. The corruption ring is completely dismantled." "Good," Rachel said simply. "There's something else. Connor, the private who tried to speak up for you, he's requested a transfer to special operations training. Says you inspired him to be better." Rachel felt something shift in her chest, an unfamiliar warmth. In all her years of operations, she'd saved lives, stopped threats, protected national security. But inspiring one young Marine to stand up for what was right, that might be the most important thing she'd accomplished at Pendleton. "Tell him," she said carefully, "that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about doing what's right despite the fear." "I'll pass that along," Wright promised. "And Colonel Porter, thank you for everything you endured to protect this base." Rachel ended the call without responding. Thanks weren't necessary. This was the job, the life she'd chosen. As the vehicle headed toward the airfield, where a black helicopter waited to take them to their next mission, she closed her eyes and let Rachel Porter, the janitor, fade away. Lieutenant Colonel Rachel "Scorpion" Porter of Ghost Unit 7 was going back to work, and despite everything, the violence that awaited, the danger, the certainty that this mission, like all the others, would leave new scars, she felt something like peace, because this was who she truly was. Not the janitor, not the victim, not the woman who'd been struck and humiliated. She was a warrior, a protector, a ghost who moved through shadows to keep others safe. And in 2 weeks, in Damascus, she would remind the world why some people were untouchable, not because of rank or privilege or connections, but because they had been forged in fire into something unbreakable. The helicopter lifted off as the sun set over California, carrying Ghost Unit 7 toward their next battlefield. Behind them, Camp Pendleton continued its daily routine, forever changed by the woman who had walked its halls with a mop and bucket, seeing everything, recording everything, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And somewhere in a military jail cell, Blake Harrison sat in silence, finally understanding the true meaning of hierarchy, of strength, of the price paid by those who served in shadows so others could live in light. He had struck a ghost and learned why some warriors were untouchable, not by regulation or rule, but by the sheer force of what they had survived and what they had become. The mess hall at Camp Pendleton would be cleaned by someone else now. But the legend of the janitor, who was actually an elite operator, would persist, passed down from Marine to Marine, a reminder that true strength often came in unexpected packages, and that respect should be given not based on appearance or position, but on the content of character. As night fell over the base, Connor stood in that same mess hall, looking at the spot where Rachel had stood her ground against 4 Marines. He thought about her words, about discipline and mission, about choosing purpose over pride. Tomorrow he would begin his journey toward special operations, carrying with him the lesson learned from a woman who had mopped these floors in silence for 6 months, gathering the evidence that would save lives and protect the integrity of the Corps. The phone call came at 0200 hours, 3 days after the confrontation at Camp Pendleton. Rachel stood on the roof of a nondescript safe house in Virginia, watching the city lights flicker below. Her encrypted phone displayed a single word: Damascus. Scorpion! The voice on the other end was gravelly, worn from years of shouting over gunfire. Director Marcus Chen of Special Operations Command, the only person with direct authority over Ghost Unit 7. The situation has accelerated. We need you in Syria within 12 hours. Rachel didn't hesitate. My team? Already en route. Reaper and Phoenix are approaching the Turkish border. Titan is establishing overwatch from Lebanon. Chen paused, and she could hear papers rustling. There's been a development. The corruption ring you exposed at Pendleton had deeper connections than we thought. She felt the pieces clicking into place in her mind. The weapons shipments Blake was protecting ended up in Damascus, modified chemical dispensers hidden inside standard ammunition crates. Someone at Pendleton was facilitating weapons transfers to Syrian opposition groups, but the chemicals, those were going somewhere else. Rachel processed this information rapidly. Iranian Revolutionary Guard? Worse, private military contractor called Cerberus International. They're planning something big, and we have less than 72 hours to stop it. The weight of the mission settled on her shoulders like familiar armor. Rules of engagement? There are none. This doesn't exist. You don't exist. If you're compromised, we never heard of you. Understood. Rachel was already moving, gathering her gear from the safe house. Send me everything you have. Already uploaded to your secure server. Scorpion. Chen's voice carried a weight of concern she rarely heard. This one's different. Cerberus has former Delta, SEALs, even some ex-Ghost Unit operators. They know our tactics. Then we'll have to be unpredictable, Rachel replied, checking her weapons. Has Pendleton been secured? 37 arrests total. Blake Harrison broke during interrogation, gave us everything. He had no idea what he was really part of. Thought he was just making some extra money letting shipments through. Rachel felt no satisfaction at Blake's downfall. He was a symptom of a larger disease, one that spread wherever power and greed intersected. What about the chemical weapons? Sarin gas, weaponized and modified for aerial dispersion. Intelligence suggests they're planning to use it during the refugee convoy movement next week. Frame it as a government attack, destabilize the entire region. The implications were staggering. Thousands of innocent lives, another war sparked by lies, years of suffering initiated by greed. Rachel's jaw tightened. We'll stop them. I know you will. Transport is waiting at Dulles, diplomatic cover as agricultural inspectors. Your contact in Damascus is Butterfly. She'll have local intelligence. Rachel knew Butterfly, a deep-cover CIA operative who'd been in Syria for 8 years, so embedded she'd almost become her cover. If she was involved, the situation was critical. 4 hours later, Rachel sat in the cargo hold of a C-130, the familiar vibration of military transport beneath her. She'd traded the janitor's coveralls for tactical gear, lightweight body armor, combat boots, weapons carefully concealed in diplomatic pouches. The transformation was complete. Across from her, Reaper was cleaning her rifle with methodical precision. The woman's scarred hands moved with practiced ease, each motion economical and purposeful. Remember the last time we were in Damascus? She asked without looking up. 2017, Rachel replied. The embassy situation. 5 of us went in, Reaper continued. 3 came out. This is different, Phoenix interjected from his position near the cargo door. His weathered face showed the strain of too many operations, too many losses. We know what we're facing this time. Titan, all 6 feet 5 inches of him, shifted in his seat. Cerberus has at least 40 operators in country. Even for us, those aren't good odds. Since when have we had good odds? Rachel asked, pulling up the intelligence files on her tablet. The photos showed a nondescript warehouse complex on the outskirts of Damascus, surrounded by refugee camps. The perfect cover. No one would authorize a strike that might hit civilians. The chemical weapons are stored here, she continued, highlighting a section of the warehouse. Butterfly's intelligence says they're planning to load them onto drones tomorrow night, fly them over the convoy route. Drones? Phoenix leaned forward. How many? 20, maybe 30, enough to create multiple attack vectors, make it look like a coordinated government strike. Reaper finally looked up from her weapon. So, we need to neutralize the chemicals, destroy the drones, and eliminate 40 trained operators in hostile territory, without backup, in less than 48 hours. When you put it like that, Titan said dryly, it sounds almost impossible. Rachel smiled, the same dangerous expression that had unsettled General Miller. Almost impossible is our specialty. The plane began its descent toward Turkish airspace. From there, they'd cross into Syria using routes Butterfly had established, avoiding both government forces and rebel checkpoints. It would be a delicate dance, one wrong step meaning capture or death. As they prepared for landing, Rachel's phone buzzed, a message from Wright at Camp Pendleton. Connor passed Special Operations Selection. Says he's following your example. Thought you should know. She deleted the message immediately. No traces, no connections to their real identities. But something warm flickered in her chest. One young Marine choosing the harder path, choosing to become something more. Perhaps that was worth the 6 months of humiliation she'd endured. The Turkish border crossing went smoothly, their diplomatic covers holding up under scrutiny. Butterfly met them in a battered Toyota pickup, her appearance so thoroughly local that Rachel had to look twice to recognize the Harvard-educated analyst beneath the Syrian widow's clothing. "Good to see you, Scorpion," Butterfly said in perfectly accented Arabic, "though I wish it were under better circumstances." "What's the situation?" Rachel asked, also in Arabic. All Ghost Unit operators were required to speak at least 4 languages fluently. "Worse than Chen told you. Cerberus has recruited local fighters, promising them money and protection. We're not just facing 40 operators, more like 200 armed hostiles." Phoenix cursed quietly. 200? "The operators are the real threat," Butterfly continued, navigating the war-torn streets with practiced ease. "The locals are just cannon fodder, meant to absorb the first wave of any attack." They drove in silence through Damascus, the once beautiful city bearing the scars of years of conflict. Buildings stood like broken teeth, walls pockmarked with bullet holes and shrapnel scars. Civilians moved through the streets with the careful awareness of people who'd learned to live with constant danger. The safe house was in the old city, a nondescript building that had survived the worst of the fighting. Butterfly had stocked it with weapons, equipment, and intelligence gathered over months of surveillance. "The warehouse is here," she said, spreading satellite photos across a table. 3 buildings connected by underground tunnels. The chemicals are in the central building, the drones in the eastern one. "Guards?" Reaper asked, studying the images. "Rotating patrols, 12-hour shifts. The operators work in teams of 8, always at least 2 teams on site." Butterfly pulled out another photo. "This is their leader, Marcus Steele, former Delta Force, dishonorably discharged for excessive force in Iraq." Rachel recognized the type, warriors who'd lost their way, who'd let the violence consume them until it was all they knew. Weaknesses? Arrogance. They think they're untouchable here. They've paid off local authorities, have protection from certain government elements. Butterfly smiled grimly. "They don't know Ghost Unit is coming." "Timeline?" Titan asked, already calculating fields of fire and approach routes. "The convoy moves in 36 hours. They'll launch the drones 2 hours before, wanting the gas to settle over the route." Butterfly pulled out a final set of photos. "There's something else. One of the operators, call sign Viper, claims to be former Ghost Unit." The room went silent. Rogue Ghost Unit operators were their worst nightmare. People with their training, their knowledge, but without their restraints. "Which unit?" Rachel asked quietly. "Ghost 3, reported KIA in Afghanistan 5 years ago." "Jackson," Phoenix breathed. "I knew him. Good operator, but unstable. Command was planning to pull him before he supposedly died." "Well, he's very much alive," Butterfly said, "and he'll recognize your tactics, your procedures." Rachel stood, moving to the window to observe the street below. The mission had just become exponentially more dangerous. A rogue ghost operator would anticipate their moves, counter their strategies. They'd have to be perfect, no margin for error. "We go tonight," she decided. "They won't expect an immediate assault." "Tonight?" Reaper questioned. "No reconnaissance, no preparation time." "We have Butterfly's intelligence. Every hour we wait is another hour they have to prepare, another hour closer to the attack." Rachel turned back to her team. "We hit them hard and fast, no warning." The next hours were spent in preparation. Weapons checked and rechecked, equipment tested, routes memorized. Rachel found herself thinking about Camp Pendleton, about the difference between Blake's petty power games and what they faced here. Blake had thought himself strong because he could intimidate a janitor. These men thought themselves strong because they could massacre civilians. Both were about to learn what real strength looked like. As darkness fell over Damascus, Ghost Unit 7 moved out. They traveled in 2 vehicles, taking separate routes to avoid detection. Rachel and Reaper in one car, Phoenix and Titan in another. Butterfly maintaining overwatch from a nearby building. The warehouse complex sat on the edge of the city, surrounded by razor wire and guard towers. Through her night vision, Rachel could see the patrols, the infrared signatures of men trying to stay warm in the desert cold. "Titan, you in position?" she whispered into her comm. "Roger. I count 6 guards on the north perimeter, 2 in each tower." "Phoenix?" "South side secure. I've got eyes on the drone storage." Rachel and Reaper approached from the east, moving through shadows with practiced silence. They'd done this dance 100 times in a dozen countries, each knowing exactly where the other would be without looking. The first guard never saw them coming. Rachel's hand covered his mouth as Reaper's blade found the gap in his body armor. They lowered him silently to the ground, already moving toward the next target. "Contact!" Phoenix's voice crackled through the comm. "Patrol moving your way. 4 hostiles." Rachel and Reaper melted into the shadows, waiting. The patrol passed within inches of them, unaware of death standing close enough to touch. Rachel let them pass. Taking them now would raise an alarm. They needed to get inside first. The side entrance was protected by an electronic lock, but Reaper had it bypassed in seconds. They slipped inside, finding themselves in a corridor lit by harsh fluorescent lights. The smell hit immediately. Chemicals, the sharp tang that meant death in gaseous form. "We're in," Rachel reported, moving to central storage. They encountered 2 more guards in the corridor. The first went down to Rachel's suppressed pistol, the second to Reaper's rifle. The suppressors kept the noise to a minimum, but they knew the clock was ticking. Soon someone would notice the missing patrols. The central storage room was massive, filled with canisters marked with false labels, agricultural supplies, medical equipment, humanitarian aid. But Rachel's chemical detector was screaming warnings. This was enough sarin gas to kill thousands. "Charge is set," Reaper said, placing explosives with strategic precision. 3 minutes to detonation. "Phoenix, status on the drones?" "Rigging them now. These things are military grade, could carry serious payload." A new voice cut through their communications. Smooth, familiar, terrifying. "Hello, Ghost Unit. I've been expecting you." Jackson, Viper, the rogue operator. "I have to admit," he continued, "I expected more time to prepare, but Scorpion always was impatient." Emergency lights began flashing, alarms wailing through the complex. They'd been made. "All units were compromised," Rachel commanded. "Execute contingency alpha." Gunfire erupted from multiple directions. The local fighters, poorly trained but numerous, began flooding the corridors. Rachel and Reaper fought their way back toward the entrance, their superior training evident in every movement. Where the locals sprayed bullets wildly, Ghost Unit placed precise shots. Where the locals rushed forward recklessly, Ghost Unit moved with tactical precision. But then the real operators arrived. Cerberus mercenaries in full tactical gear, moving with the same deadly efficiency as Ghost Unit. The firefight intensified, bullets filling the air like angry hornets. "Titan, we need cover!" The boom of Titan's .50 caliber rifle answered, punching through walls to eliminate threats they couldn't even see. His overwatch position gave him perfect fields of fire, but it also made him a target. "I've got company up here," Titan reported, his voice strained. "Multiple hostiles climbing the building." Phoenix's voice cut through. "Drones are rigged, but I'm pinned down. Can't reach extraction." Rachel made a tactical decision. "Butterfly, execute distraction protocol." Explosions rocked the western side of the complex. Butterfly's pre-placed charges creating chaos and drawing fighters away from their positions. In the confusion, Rachel and Reaper pushed forward, reaching Phoenix's position just as a Cerberus operator rounded the corner. The man was good, trained, experienced. But Rachel was better. Her knife found his throat before he could raise his weapon, and she was already moving past as he fell. "Move! Move! Move!" They fought their way toward the exit, the countdown timer on the explosives ticking toward 0. Behind them, more Cerberus operators appeared, including one Rachel recognized even through his tactical mask. Jackson, He moved with the fluid grace she remembered, the economy of motion that marked Ghost Unit training. Their eyes met across the chaotic battlefield, a moment of recognition between former allies turned enemies. He raised his rifle, and Rachel dove behind cover as bullets sparked off concrete inches from her head. This wasn't like fighting regular mercenaries or even special forces. This was fighting herself, someone who knew every move she might make. 30 seconds to detonation, Reaper warned. They needed to get clear of the blast radius. Rachel made a choice that went against every tactical instinct. Instead of seeking cover, she stood and ran directly at Jackson, firing as she moved. The unexpected aggression caught him off guard for a crucial second, forcing him to dodge rather than shoot. That second was all Ghost Unit needed. They burst through the exit as the charges detonated behind them. The explosion was massive, chemicals burning in brilliant green flames that lit up the night sky. Secondary explosions followed as the drone fuel ignited, turning the entire complex into an inferno. But there was no time to appreciate their handiwork. Cerberus survivors were converging on their position, and local military forces would arrive soon, drawn by the explosions. Titan, status? Alive, came the pained response. But I'm hit. Left shoulder. Can you move? Negative. I'm trapped on the roof, at least 10 hostiles between me and ground level. Rachel's mind raced through options. They never left anyone behind, but extracting Titan would mean fighting through overwhelming numbers. I'm going back, she said. Negative, Titan replied immediately. Complete the mission. I'll hold them as long as I can. We don't leave people behind, Rachel insisted, already moving toward his building. But Phoenix grabbed her arm. Scorpion, look. Through the smoke and flames, more vehicles were arriving. Government forces, rebel groups, everyone drawn by the massive explosion. The situation was spiraling beyond even their ability to control. Then Butterfly's voice, calm amid chaos. I have a solution. 60 seconds. Rachel didn't know what the CIA operative had planned, but she'd learned to trust Butterfly's improvisations. Titan, hold for 60 seconds. Roger that. Better make it count. The longest 60 seconds of Rachel's life passed as they held their position, exchanging fire with Cerberus operators while watching Titan's building. Then, suddenly, a helicopter appeared. Not military, but a medical evacuation bird with red crescent markings. Your ride is here, Butterfly announced, courtesy of some friends who owe me favors. The helicopter couldn't land in the firefight, but it could hover low enough for fast rope extraction. Rachel and her team fought their way to the extraction point, while the helicopter swooped toward Titan's position. Rachel watched through her scope as Titan, despite his wounded shoulder, fast-roped from the roof to the hovering bird. Cerberus operators tried to target the helicopter, but suppressing fire from Ghost Unit kept them pinned. All units extracted, Butterfly reported. Rendezvous at Safe House Bravo. As they fled through the burning streets of Damascus, Rachel allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The chemical weapons were destroyed, the drone attack prevented, thousands of lives saved. But the mission wasn't complete. At Safe House Bravo, a abandoned medical clinic, they regrouped. Titan's shoulder was bad but manageable, a through and through that had missed anything vital. Butterfly worked on him with the efficiency of someone who'd done field medicine too many times. Jackson escaped, Phoenix reported, along with at least a dozen Cerberus operators. Rachel nodded. She'd expected as much. Men like Jackson didn't die easily. There's more, Butterfly said, looking up from Titan's wound. I intercepted Cerberus communications. They have a backup plan. The chemicals we destroyed were only half their supply. The room fell silent. After everything they'd been through, the mission was only half complete. Where's the rest? Rachel asked. Mobile lab, convoy of trucks heading for the Turkish border. They're planning to launch the attack from there. Use Turkish airspace to avoid Syrian defenses. Reaper checked her ammunition. How long do we have? 6 hours, maybe less. Rachel looked at her team, wounded, exhausted, running on adrenaline and determination. Any sane person would call for backup, for fresh troops. But sanity had never been a Ghost Unit requirement. We finish this, she said simply. The others nodded. No questions, no complaints. This was who they were, what they did. The convoy was moving along a desert highway. 3 trucks with escort vehicles front and rear. Through drone surveillance courtesy of Butterfly's CIA resources, they could see at least 20 operators providing security. Jackson will be expecting us, Phoenix noted. He knows we wouldn't leave the job half done. Then we give him what he doesn't expect, Rachel replied. She outlined a plan that was audacious even by ghost unit standards. 3 hours later, Rachel stood alone in the middle of the highway, no weapons visible, hands raised. The convoy approached slowly, cautiously, operators scanning for threats. The lead vehicle stopped 50 meters away. Jackson emerged, his mask removed, face showing a mixture of respect and contempt. "Scorpion, I should have known you'd try something dramatic." "It's over, Jackson. The chemicals are gone. Cerberus is exposed. Walk away." He laughed, a sound without humor. "Walk away? Do you know what they're paying for this operation? Enough to disappear forever, live like kings?" "Blood money," Rachel said simply, "paid for with innocent lives." "Innocent?" Jackson spread his arms, gesturing at the war-torn landscape around them. "There are no innocents here. Everyone's guilty of something." "That's where you're wrong," Rachel replied. "That's where you were always wrong." Jackson's eyes narrowed. "Where's your team, Scorpion? You didn't come alone." "I did," Rachel lied smoothly. "This is between us, ghost unit to ghost unit." For a moment, Jackson seemed to consider it. Then his hand moved toward his weapon. "You always were too noble for your own good." The shot came from 800 meters away, Reaper's rifle speaking once. Jackson's weapon flew from his hand as the bullet struck it, sending him stumbling backward. Then chaos. Phoenix and Titan emerged from concealed positions, launching smoke grenades that obscured the battlefield. Rachel dropped flat as bullets filled the air where she'd been standing, rolling toward the ditch beside the road. The battle was fierce but brief. Ghost Unit had chosen their positions perfectly, creating overlapping fields of fire that decimated the Cerberus operators. But the real objective was the trucks. Rachel sprinted toward the middle vehicle, where the chemical weapons were stored. A Cerberus operator tried to stop her, but her knife was faster than his gun. She yanked open the truck's door to find a mobile laboratory, canisters of chemicals ready for deployment. "Everyone clear!" she shouted into her comm, pulling the white phosphorus grenade from her vest. It would burn hot enough to destroy the chemicals without dispersing them, but the explosion would be significant. She pulled the pin, threw the grenade, and ran. The explosion lifted her off her feet, searing heat washing over her as the mobile lab became an inferno. She hit the ground hard, rolling to dissipate the impact, ears ringing from the blast. When the smoke cleared, the convoy was destroyed. Cerberus operators lay scattered across the highway, dead or dying. Jackson was on his knees, clutching his wounded hand, looking at the destruction of his lucrative operation. Rachel approached him slowly, weapon raised. It didn't have to be this way. He looked up at her, something broken in his eyes. "You still don't get it, do you? We're all already dead. Everything we did, everyone we killed, it hollowed us out. The only difference between us is you still pretend it matters." "It does matter," Rachel said quietly. "Every life saved matters." Jackson laughed again, blood running from his mouth. "Tell that to the ghost, Scorpion. Tell that to everyone we've killed in the name of freedom." Before Rachel could respond, he moved. Not for a weapon, but for a dead man's switch he'd concealed. Rachel's shot was instant, precise, but too late. Jackson fell backward, the switch triggering. "Secondary devices!" Butterfly's voice screamed through the comm. "Get clear now!" Hidden charges along the roadside detonated in sequence, turning the highway into a killing field. Rachel ran, her team converging on the extraction point as explosions chased them across the desert. They made it to the vehicles just as the final charge detonated, the shockwave rocking their escape. As they drove away, Rachel looked back at the burning convoy, at the smoke rising into the Syrian sky. Mission complete. The chemical attack prevented, Cerberus destroyed, thousands of lives saved. But the cost weighed on her. Jackson, the other operators, even the local fighters who'd chosen the wrong side. They were all someone's son, someone's father, someone's friend. "Scorpion," Titan said quietly from the back seat, reading her mood. "You saved those refugees, kids, families, innocent people who would have died horrible deaths." "I know," Rachel replied, but knowing didn't make the weight any lighter. 24 hours later, Camp Pendleton, California. Colonel Wright stood in the same mess hall where everything had started, reading a classified report about a chemical weapons attack prevented in Syria. The details were sparse, the actors unnamed, but he knew. Somehow, he knew this connected to Rachel Porter, the janitor who'd been so much more. Connor approached, wearing his new Special Operations training uniform. "Sir, did you hear? Someone stopped a major terrorist attack in Syria, saved thousands of refugees." Wright nodded slowly. "I heard, Private. Unknown heroes preventing unknown threats. Do you think—" Connor paused, then continued. "Do you think she was involved? Colonel Porter?" "That's classified well above both our pay grades," Wright replied. But he smiled slightly. "Though I wouldn't be surprised. Warriors like her don't really retire. They just move from one battlefield to another." Connor stood straighter, unconsciously mimicking Rachel's posture. "I want to be like that someday, the kind of warrior who protects people, even if they never know." Wright clapped him on the shoulder. "Then remember what she taught us. Real strength isn't about power or recognition. It's about service, sacrifice, and the willingness to endure anything for the mission." As Connor left to continue his training, Wright remained in the empty mess hall. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, illuminating the spot where Rachel had stood her ground. The floor was clean, mopped by someone else now, but the memory lingered. His phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number, just 2 words: "Mission complete." He deleted it immediately, but the warmth of relief flooded through him. Somewhere in the world, Rachel Porter and her team had prevented a catastrophe. Somewhere, children would wake up tomorrow because Ghost Unit 7 had stood in the darkness. Damascus, Syria, 3 days later. Rachel stood on a rooftop overlooking the city, watching the refugee convoy pass safely below. Thousands of people fleeing conflict, seeking safety, unaware of how close they'd come to becoming victims of a false flag operation. Butterfly joined her, back in her local disguise. Cerberus International has been officially disbanded, their assets frozen, operators either dead or arrested. The corruption ring at Pendleton led us right to them. "Threads connecting," Rachel murmured. "Blake Harrison thought he was just making extra money. He had no idea he was enabling mass murder." "Most don't," Butterfly agreed. "Evil rarely announces itself. It hides behind greed, ambition, small compromises that add up to atrocity." Rachel's phone buzzed. Director Chen. "Scorpion, ready for extraction?" She looked at the convoy below, at the families walking toward what they hoped would be safety. "Ready, sir." "Good. We have a situation developing in Eastern Europe. Ghost Unit 7 is requested." Of course there was. There always would be. As long as there were those who would prey on the innocent, there would need to be those who stood against them. "Send the details," Rachel said. "We'll be ready." As she left the rooftop, she thought about Connor back at Pendleton, beginning his journey to become something more. She thought about the refugees below, alive because her team had risked everything. She thought about Jackson, lost to the darkness that threatened all warriors who dealt in death. The work would never be done. The mission would never truly end. But that was acceptable. That was the price of being a ghost, a shadow warrior, one of the untouchables who stood between civilization and chaos. Her phone rang one more time, an unknown number she recognized as Wright's. "Ma'am," his voice was formal but warm. "I wanted you to know Blake Harrison was sentenced today. 20 years, no parole. He asked me to tell you he's sorry for everything." Rachel considered this. "Tell him apologies don't change the past, but they might influence the future. I'll pass that along, and ma'am, thank you for showing us what real strength looks like." She ended the call without responding. Thanks weren't necessary. This was the life she'd chosen, the burden she carried. Tomorrow would bring new threats, new missions, new sacrifices. But tonight, thousands of refugees would sleep safely, unaware that death had passed them by. Rachel Porter, the janitor, had endured 6 months of humiliation to expose corruption. Lieutenant Colonel Rachel "Scorpion" Porter of Ghost Unit 7 had prevented a massacre that would have changed the course of history. They were the same person, the same warrior, serving in different ways. As her transport lifted off from Syrian soil, carrying her toward the next mission, Rachel closed her eyes and let herself feel, just for a moment, the satisfaction of a job well done. Then she pushed it aside, focusing on what came next. Because somewhere, another threat was building. Somewhere, innocent people were in danger. And somewhere, Ghost Unit 7 would appear from the shadows, striking without warning, protecting those who would never know they needed protection. The general had been right. Some people were untouchable, not because of rank or privilege, but because they had sacrificed their own humanity to preserve others. They had become weapons so others could remain innocent. They had chosen to live in darkness so others could walk in light. And as the helicopter carried her toward the next battlefield, Rachel allowed herself one final thought about Blake Harrison and that day in the mess hall. He had thought strength came from intimidation, from the ability to hurt those weaker than himself. But true strength, she knew, came from the opposite, from the willingness to be hurt, to endure, to sacrifice everything for those who couldn't protect themselves. Service doesn't seek recognition. It never had. It never would. The mission continued.
nicht diese Töne, sondern lasst uns angenehmere anstimmen und Freude schöner Götter, Funken, Tochter aus Elim.